From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is All Things with Kim Strassel.
Congress is back in what it hopes is in the home stretch of its one big beautiful bill as Republicans go into the final slog of this hopeful legislative victory. It's a good time to sum up how this GOP Washington is faring so far. And to do that this week, I have the incredibly wise, incredibly knowledgeable Karl Rove, who has over time seen and done it all. He's been a policy analyst, an advisor, a strategist, a consultant, a commentator. Karl, welcome. And I want to apologize straight up. We don't have any video yet on this podcast, so you will not be able to use your famous whiteboard. You will just have to verbalize everything.
That's okay, because they don't have to leave my face then, which is made for radio. So
we miss your face, but we're going to get video here soon. I want to let listeners know that. Here's why I really wanted to get you on the show this week of all weeks. We've entered the kind of feel of an administration that's now moving into a new phase. We're past all of those early days and months of rapid fire announcements and orders and who's getting picked for the cabinet. Elon Musk is now wrapping up his part of DOGE. We have Congress now fully in the actual grind of this legislation they want to put out, reconciliation. Even some of those lawsuits that got filed against the administration are now being heard and litigated rather than simply being filed. Congress is even beginning to work on next year's appropriations bills. I know people talk about the first 100 days, but I've always thought that was a little too early to judge things. Right now, as you look at this GOP Washington, everything it's trying to get done, what kind of grades do you give it? One for policy and one for politics.
Look, I'm with you on the 100-day question. I mean, this goes back to, FDR in 1933. And remember, he didn't get sworn in on January 20th. He was sworn in on the 4th of March. So he had, the better part of another 6 weeks to get prepared to come into office. And then he roared out of the gates with a bunch of emergency measures to try and staunch the Great Depression. We've been stuck on the 100-day thing, and it is completely, I think, useless, but I don't know how to get away from it.
Me neither. I keep trying.
So if you had to grade him, I'd give him high marks on two things, one of which we talk about a little, but not enough, and that's the border. I live in a border state, Texas, and what has happened along our Rio Grande River is just nothing short of astonishing. We've gone from huge inflows of illegals every day, every week, every month for 4 years, inundating, the Border Patrol, overwhelming law enforcement, depleting soup kitchens, filling up hospital beds. There's a little hospital in one part of the border, Eagle Pass and Del Rio. It's got 110 beds, I think, in the hospital, and they put out $100,000 a month in uncompensated care for illegals who are being dumped on their doorsteps.
Holy moly.
Well, if you think that's bad, the mayor of Yuma, Arizona is a friend of mine, and I was talking to him about it. He said it's $1 million a month for their hospital. And of course, this is uncompensated care. And you talk to these officials on the border, Democrat and Republican, and it's their soup kitchens and food pantries that are being overwhelmed. It's their law enforcement that is having to deal with desperate people who need food and shelter and water, and let alone the cartels. And, and social services overwhelmed. And now suddenly it's dried up. I mean, if there's one thing that Trump has said that is accurate, we didn't need a new law. We just needed a new president.
Yep.
It's astonishing to me he has yet to take the victory lap. And if he were to take the victory lap, he would be welcomed with open arms by a wide variety of Democratic local elected officials, mayors, county executives, we call them judges in Texas, and county commissioners and sheriffs who are appreciative of what he's done. Another thing that he has begun to do, and that he talks about very, very little, is a repeat of what he did on deregulation in his first term.
Right.
And we forget these numbers. These numbers of what the cost of these regulations are not written by the enemies of the regulation. They're written by the regulators themselves in the process and published in the Federal Registry when they published the regulation itself. Under Obama, in 8 years, he had $870 billion of regulatory burden added to the economy. The net under Trump 1 was about $80 billion. In 4 years under Joe Joe Biden, it's $1.9 trillion of additional cost to our economy, including in one regulation alone, the so-called tailpipe regulation, $870 billion in one reg alone, all
crazy.
The entire regulatory burden of Obama. And the Republicans, led by Trump, are systematically going through the process of either using the Congressional Regulatory Act to kill it, or they're using the tools within the agencies to withdraw and revamp and modify those rules. And that's going to have a huge impact on our economy. So on those two, I give him good marks. Look, it's too early on a lot of the rest of the stuff to have anything but an incomplete. Well, what is our tax bill going to end up looking like?
Yeah.
What is the whole mess around tariffs going to be like? What's the handling of Ukraine going to be? There are lots of movement in the right directions, for example, particularly in the Indo-PACOM region by our Defense and State Department. The Secretary of State and the Secretary of Treasury are doing great things in their respective areas, but it's too early to say. The tariff situation is just as confused and conflicting and upsetting as it has been before. We've just gotten so used to the gyrations that each time there's 50% tariffs here and 25% tariffs there, and then we withdraw them, and then we institute them, and then we're going to put them on hold for a while, and then we're going to bring them back. All of that has gotten us run so ragged and impacted the market so much that I think we're finally to the stage of exhaustion, and people are starting to say, well, I'm either going to stay on the sidelines or I'm going to hope for the best. But I'd say that a lot of incompletes, and necessarily so for the modern era.
I couldn't agree with you more on those two areas, on immigration and deregulation. And my one pick on this is actually what you just said, is the failure to take a victory lap. The policies have been fantastic, but I think the administration's decision to kind of step all over itself with some of these high profile deportation fights it's chosen has gotten in the way of that incredible, amazing, bigger story. Why on earth he has not gone down to the border and just done a big, as you say, victory lap, I don't get. And he might think deregulation is boring, but actually a lot of people really get it intuitively, and they understand the importance, everything from small business owners to the big corporate America. So it'd be better if they were pushing that more. One other thing, and this may be me, I want to ask you about DOGE. Elon Musk is obviously on his way out. He's leaving behind some talented people. He says he'll come back and check in on things, swan back in. DOGE claims it's identified about $175 billion in savings. And, he's getting some cat calls, that he didn't get anywhere near that somewhat optimistic $2 trillion number he had thrown out as his goal. To me, the importance of this was simply the exercise of somebody deciding that they were going to take seriously the question of the way the government functions, opening up the hood and looking at the steaming engine underneath and identifying some of the most egregious examples. And I don't know what you think about that. These are things like, why are we giving small business loans to babies? And why do we have 87 different tech departments and computer systems, none of which speak to each other? Do you think this will have a lasting consequence in the future, or is just this something that Congress is going to forget about as soon as it can?
Well, I think that's very much up in the air. And this is going to sound really strange coming from me, having been involved in the 2000 campaign. This was done once before in a more deliberate, organized fashion, where discussions were held, goals were set, and agencies were given targets that they were empowered to reach. And we saw the largest decline in the number of federal government employees, reducing the level of the federal government back to the level of the 1950s. And this was done by Bill Clinton and handed over to his vice president, Al Gore, to handle.
Right.
And you have to look back and say they did a damn good job at it. Why he never emphasized that in the 2000 campaign is beyond me, but it would have helped him. My sense is on this, yes, there's some very smart people involved in this process, but sometimes it helps to actually know the agency and to know its mission, and it helps to have discussions rather than 21-year-old tech bros piloting in and blowing things up. So I'm afraid that it's not going to be something that's going to be well received and deliberate in its impact and beneficial over the long term. You mentioned, $170 billion. Well, the proof is in the rescission, in my mind. You can say you got the spending, but what you've got to do is you got to do one of two things. You got to ask for the Congress for permission not to spend the money, and you need to ask the Congress for the ability to reorganize and revamp parts of the government. I thought one of the key moments in all this was that sort of heated cabinet meeting where Elon Musk and Marco Rubio went after it. And Marco Rubio was right. Tell me what the target is and let me be the person who executes it inside my agency. I'm ultimately going to be held responsible as the cabinet official. I'm going to have to defend these things up on Capitol Hill, and having, some DOGE employee who's going to be there for, special government employee who's limited in service to, 200 and some odd days is going to come and go, and I'm left with the consequences. Tell me what you want me to try and get done, and I'll get it done. And I thought that was a critical moment. I think that's where the eyes were opened to by President Trump, that this is something where if he's going to have ultimate success, he's got to have the cabinet involved because they're the people ultimately are responsible for it. Let me give you one final example. Somebody went in there and said, hey, look at this. We have the easy ability to get rid of probationary employees, people who've been in their slot or their agency for less than 2 years. And so they immediately began to take, a giant scalpel to everything that was, quote, probationary. Well, less than 2 years ago, we reorganized the agency inside the Department of Energy that is responsible for the every 20 to 30 year upgrade of our nuclear weapons programs. People don't understand the Department of Agency, 2/3 of their budget has to do with our nuclear weapons program. And the group that was in charge of this had been created in a new office in the last several years, less than 2 years. And so as a result, every one of them was a probationary employee, and they fired them all by email. And then realized, oh my God, literally the nuclear scientists who are in charge of our weapons program have now all been fired. We shouldn't have done that. And they didn't have email addresses for them all. They whacked them on their government accounts and no longer knew how to get a hold of them. So this was ill. It had a good intention. Government deserves occasionally to be revamped, revitalized, challenged in every way possible. But it ought to be done in a thoughtful fashion where there is a plan that can be executed and measurable goals. The $170 billion they claim in savings is well less than the $2 trillion, but they've asked for rescission from the Congress of just over $9 billion. $9 billion out of a, $6 trillion budget? Not there.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, more with Karl Rove. Welcome back. Kim Strassel here with All Things, and I'm here this week with Karl Rove. I take everything you just said on board, especially the points about cabinet secretaries needing to be involved because their names are at the top of the masthead and they take the responsibility in the end. My huge criticism with this, though, is not necessarily DOGE. I'm probably a little bit more tolerant of creative disruption just because I've gotten so tired of watching Washington work on autopilot. And I think sometimes you can fix what you break. But my criticism is that none of this was ever going to work or stick unless you had a president that was fully behind this. Once DOGE said, this is what we need to cut, the president's like, okay, this is what we're cutting, and you, Congress, are going to cut it. And unless you had Congress with the spine to do that. And that rescission package that you just mentioned that is being transmitted to Congress, why on earth it isn't $175 billion, I don't know. We both know because the $9 billion that they are asking for happens to be the only few tiny items that have absolute unanimity among every member of Congress that it's okay to get rid of. So you don't have a president willing to push on this, and you don't have a Congress willing to risk anything to cut some of this.
And look, structural changes are needed. To me, again, going back to the State Department, every Secretary of State I've known has, in the modern era, has sort of at one time or another pulled their hair over the USAID, because the point was, whose foreign policy are they serving in support of? Theirs or the government's? And what they found was, State Department money going to support pride parades in Ireland. Well, first of all, why are we doing that? And second of all, why Ireland? I thought they were a wealthy country. But what happened there is that somebody went in and just said, you know what, we're going to whack the whole thing. And as a result, vital health programs, PEPFAR and others that are relatively inexpensive and have a huge payback for the United States. That is to say, people literally saving millions of lives for a relatively small cost, and all, with the name of the United States on it. This is like the Marshall Program in Europe, which left generations of Europeans deeply grateful for the United States and its friendship, and some some unknown person goes in and whacks these programs, and there are going to be long-term consequences for the United States, let alone the health and security and prosperity of a continent that is otherwise going to occupy too much of our time and attention.
Let's talk about Congress a little bit, because they're going to get this rescission package. They're also working on reconciliation. And as you can tell, I'm feeling a bit cranky about Congress these days. But I want to ask you, I'll step back and I'm going to get your more considered view, especially because you've been on both sides of these kind of battles in the past. I mean, you've been outside like I am, where we offer advice and hopefully constructive criticism, but you've also worked in an administration, and you can know how hard it can be sometimes to get these legislative priorities over the finish line, the gives and takes you have to make. So my question, when you look at the House bill that came out that we're now getting modified in the Senate, but without even getting into any of the specifics as to whether they should have this or that in the bill, is this bill as good as this Republican Congress and presidency could have got? Or is this the limit given the many different factions and the tiny majority that Speaker Mike Johnson has to work with? Could it have been better, or is this pretty good given what they've got?
It could have been better. I mean, I think I
agree. I was trying to give you the chance to tell me why I was wrong.
No. I mean, look, there's just a bunch of stuff that was ladled into this bill because the administration wanted it, and they should have, in my opinion, been more
disciplined.
Well, disciplined and consultative at the beginning, because there's a bunch of stuff in there that's going to cause indigestion, and they haven't spent enough time. You know, the tough part is Medicaid. And frankly, the Medicaid changes, as I put in my column a couple weeks ago, require people who are able-bodied to work or be looking for work. That's something that is enormously popular, better than 2 out of every 3 Americans. We shouldn't have illegal immigrants on the tab. We should allow states to frequently examine their roles to find people who should not be under the law on this program. And the Republicans could step up and say, we want to protect the most vulnerable among us, and people who are able-bodied ought to be working, and illegal immigrants shouldn't have the magnet to come here because they get free health care. And if you don't agree with us, fine. Democrats, you defend adding illegals. You defend keeping states from looking at their roles. You defend the able-bodied being idle. Go ahead and defend those things. But we're standing up for the most vulnerable in America, seniors, poor seniors, children from low-income families, and the disabled, which is what this program was meant for. And we're also standing up for every American taxpayer, because we shouldn't be spending money we don't have. I got to tell you, I was surprised. There's a podcast out. Remember Mr. Coup d'etat, Mehmet Oz?
Yeah.
Well, he had a podcast recently in which he, as the head of the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare, studied Medicaid and Medicare. He did a terrific job of putting it in the right perspective. There was a tone of compassion. There was a toughness about getting things done right. There was a desire to make certain that every American has access, that deserves to have access under the law. But there was also a belief that, you know what, we're doing nobody a favor by saying, if you're able-bodied, you don't have to work. And we're not doing our country any good by saying, if you're an illegal, you get free health care that is not designed for you, designed for the citizens in the United States and specific situations, and a belief that, you know what, states can do better, and finding there's an enormous amount of fraud in here, and we can all do better, and states ought to be allowed to use the tools to find the fraud, because it's affecting their state budgets as well as the federal budget. I thought it was a terrific presentation, and you're now starting to see some members of Congress. There's this young guy from Colorado, Gabe Evans. He does a terrific job of getting out there and laying out the issues. And part of this is people say, well, you're going to take people off of Medicaid. Well, the point of both Dr. Oz and Gabe Evans is the program is not designed to be free health care for everybody. It's designed to be assistance for people who are disabled, poor seniors, or children from low-income families. And if you want to have everybody on it free, go ahead and pass a law saying that. But until then, the law has to govern who gets on that tab. And I thought both the congressman and Mehmet Oz did a great job of showing the path forward for Republicans in this coming election to go up there and defend what they're doing, and challenge the Democrats to defend what they want to do, which is let the able-bodied on the tab, let the illegals get the care, and don't really allow the states to be as deliberate and as insistent on cleaning up the waste and fraud as they want to be.
We're going to take one more break. When we come back, more on Republicans and their reconciliation bill.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is All Things with Kim Strassel.
Welcome back. maybe you can explain something to me. When you hear Senator Josh Hawley, obviously he's been a big critic of making any changes to Medicaid. He's said that publicly. He's pushing back against members of his own caucus in the Senate. And his arguments, and he's been voicing these even more loudly recently, is, any cuts to Medicaid are dumb. And behind this argument is our new coalition includes people who are on Medicaid. And so we can no longer afford to cut it in any way. Now, I take some issue because I actually disagree. The way he's framing this is the way Democrats would frame it, that you are cutting it rather than that you are reforming it in a way that able-bodied adults are no longer getting a program that was never meant for them in the first place. But what do you make of this argument that some in the Republican Party have, that given that they're looking for new voters and that the Republicans have become more of a working class party, you can't afford to touch any of these entitlements anymore?
Well, first of all, the ultimate responsibility to all Americans is to make certain that our country is prosperous and that our fiscal house is in order. It irritated the heck out of me when the Biden White House said, we're going to take a power that we do not have, the ability to wipe out the assets that are held by the American people in the form of the student loans that we're supposed to get repaid, our government is supposed to get repaid on. We're going to wipe those out because we're worried about getting votes from the young voters.
Right.
And so, bread and circuses, is this Rome again? Do we have this, Caesar trying to appease the populace by giving them bread and circuses? And, Bernie Sanders says this, we can't take anybody who's on any one of these programs and toss them off, even if they are illegal aliens, or even if they are able-bodied, or even if they are on there because of fraud. Josh Hawley, please, if you want to say, I'm doing this because I think the American people and the Missourians that I represent who are on Medicaid, I don't care whether they're illegal or not. I don't care whether they're able-bodied or not. I don't care if they're covered by the law or not. They are my people. Now, I read a book once. It was called Hillbilly Elegy. Yeah. And it said that the Appalachian region and great parts of the Midwest had suffered because of the decline of the culture of personal responsibility and an understanding that work is liberating and work rises you up. Instead, people had fallen into a dependency on government. And now we have, sort of the new thing is, if you're a populist, you've got to now turn that around. All those people are victims. They're victims of corporations who have somehow ravaged their lives. And we've got to take care of them by giving them everything free. Forget it. That's not what those people want, and it's not what God decided that he wants them to be. It's what they have decided themselves that they want to be. We need to work as a country on reigniting a culture of personal responsibility and saying we as a country are going to be compassionate to those who need our help. But if you're able-bodied, by God, you got to take care of yourself, and we'll help you, but we're not going to give you lots of free things.
Well, Karl, I absolutely love that phrase. Washington's number one duty is to ensure America is a prosperous nation. We're going to leave it on that high note. Everybody think about that for a bit. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. We want to thank our listeners. If you like the show, you can hit the subscribe button. We will be here again next week. And if you'd like to write to us, you can at atkim@wsj.com.